Peter, thank you for talking to me. Before I ask you about Mardi Gras and those events of 1978, what was your involvement in gay activism and politics prior to that?
Well, I was fortunate enough to find out about the meeting that we had in 1970. The meetings were organised very cunningly so that small groups of people knew about one another, but not how many other small groups there were. Because remember that any activity between two men of a sexual nature, or even suggesting it, was not only very illegal, but the punishments were quite relentless. 14 years penal servitude, and they meant every year of that. And for women, anything that a woman did with another woman in public was seen to be objectionable behaviour. And the definition of objectionable was that a constable found that behaviour objectionable. One constable, that was all that was needed. So consequently, we were very careful about planning anything in those days. But I found out that there was going to be a meeting, and it was going to be in Balmain East, in a church hall, and that it was going to start at I think, 12 o'clock? No, 7 o'clock at night. It was raining very lightly, but that didn't matter. And we were also asked, the moment we arrived, we were asked that when we had a break for cigarettes, to go outside. Now, going outside meant going into the narrow little piece of land immediately outside the back of the church hall, which held about 20 people, all men, all smoking. That nearly put me off smoking altogether at that stage, in fact. But I was very naughty at that meeting. I said to lots of people, I wonder how many other ASIO members are here watching us. And everybody thought that was not very funny at all, actually. At the end of the meeting, we were asked to volunteer for one of the activities, such as the newsletter, law reform, or some sort of planning social activity. And I went for the law reform bit. So that was in 1970. Camp New South Wales got thoroughly underway as a result of that meeting, and there were camp associations in every other state of the Commonwealth, but ours was the one that really blossomed, Victoria coming a close second. By the end of 1971, we had already found premises where we could have parties, which generated enough money to pay for the rent for the premises, which was all that we needed to do. And we were then evicted from that because the owner realised that we were having far too much fun, and the premises were probably worth much more than he was getting in rent. So rent was terminated, the lease was terminated, much to the sadness of the fire brigade officers who lived next door on the other side of the fence, because they used to come and visit us. We always knew when there had been a change in the rosters next door, because some of the fire officers would disappear and other fire officers would materialise, and they'd like to dance as it was, and other things, I'm told. So we then had to look for new premises, which we found very temporarily indeed, and until we found 33A Glebe Point Road, where we were able to set up the telephone system, Phone a Friend, which had already been started at Bonsalboon and Duval's house in 16 Terry Street in Balmain, thanks to the work of Bruce Wood. I've just had a little emotion. Bruce Woodward. Bruce had been to the International Liberation Conference in Edinburgh in 1969 and came back with the lambda, which is the Greek letter L, and that was Liberation badge. But the gays had won it from everybody else and said, this is for us. So that was the very first gay badge, Liberation badge. And Bruce was responsible for setting up this telephone service. There's a lovely rumour as to why he thought it was a good idea. He's in one of the local pubs, and there's a young man holding a beer and looking desperately lonely and very embarrassed. And Bruce thought he should be talking to somebody. So Bruce went over and said to him, "What's wrong?" And this bloke said, "I think I'm gay." And Bruce said, And the young man then talked to him, and Bruce said, look, gave him the best advice you can get, that if you are gay, live with it and be creative with it. If you're not gay, put it down and leave it to somebody else. But he came back to the wilds of Terry Street, Balmain, and said, we need some sort of support service. And somebody there, a delightful man from Sweden, said, telephone service. So that's why Phone a Friend was started. And that's when I became really active in the movement. We were run as a collective, which worried the corporate affairs company no end, because we were supposed to have a company secretary and all sorts of things like that. But we kept minutes, but we had no permanent chair. And the very first chair of Camp New South Wales, forced on us, was a man who was the company secretary, and as such was nominally in charge of us. He fortunately never tried that. Anthony Green, who's a well-known commentator these days.
On the ABC.
And a psephologist of some calibre. So that's how the service started, and I served there. We had a significant meeting, I think in 1981, where it was decided that camp needed to split to the political activist side and the social services side, and I opted for the social services side. But we were very fortunate that people of the calibre of Ron Austin decided to continue in the activist side.
Did anybody join both? Or could you only choose one or the other?
No, there was no exclusion, but I don't recall anybody that I knew who belonged to both movements, because both were very demanding on time and commitment.
Obviously, on the evening of the 24th of June 1978, there was the parade. But earlier that day, there had been a march, I believe, in Sydney. Was
Yes.
it down George Street?
It started from St Andrew's Cathedral. That part of the land belonged to the town hall, not the cathedral, of course. And it went down George Street to Belmore Park.
And then in the afternoon, there was a meeting at Paddington Town Hall.
No,
No one.
well, not that I know of. The meeting that planned the whole of the march happened at the Camp New South Wales headquarters.
And why was that date chosen?
Because it was pure memory of the wonderful thing that happened in New York.
The Stonewall riots.
Stonewall riots. We thought what those drag queens were prepared to do, we should be able to do equally well. And what they were on about was what we were suffering from too, police harassment. Because in those days the police not only harassed you, but they were entrapping, and they were lying in court in the evidence they gave.
Was the police entrapment quite common?
Oh yes, yeah. It was known as the Parks and Garden Squad, and I had the pleasure of listening to an appeal in the district court before a judge who, unknown to the police officers in question, had been arrested whilst at a public convenience. He was relieving himself, as one does at public conveniences, and he was picked up by two police officers in plain clothes, and in being driven down to Central Courts, he was told that what would happen was that he would be charged, and the bail sergeant would set a bail, which he was obliged to give, and then the following morning at 10 o'clock he must front up to the magistrate's court. But if he'd like to give them the $200 bail money, they'd see that it was recorded, but he didn't turn up in court the following morning. And this judge, strangely enough, thought that that was not what he was supposed to do as a citizen. So he said, no, he'd be quite happy. So he goes before the bail sergeant, who recognises him and apologises to him, and has to be convinced that he has to accept the charge and the bail. And then the following morning at the Central Criminal Court, in the good old days, where there was a little wooden screen covering the person who was about to be charged from the rest of the audience, the public. And the judge walked there. The magistrate stood up and he walked into his court. And the judge, the district court judge, had a lot of time convincing the magistrate it was his court, and he had to run his court, and he was just somebody who'd been charged. And so the magistrate said, yes, all right, sir. And said to the police, Crown prosecutor, is there any evidence? No, none at all. Do you have no witnesses? No, neither, a prison. What should I do? I think you would have to withdraw the charge, Your Worship. Oh, all right then. So the judge walked free, as naturally he was going to have to. And this judge was a delightful old gentleman, he really was. And now we've got a man who's appealing a charge of entrapment. And one police officer turned up. He's no longer in civilian clothes, he's now back in uniform, he's a one-striper. His mate's been transferred to Cobar, so he can't give any evidence. So there's only one police officer to give evidence, and that's not sufficient. So the judge had absolutely no trouble in dismissing the man and supporting the appeal. And that's when we found out that the Parks and Garden Squad had actually been stood down. It no longer existed, but it never actually had existed.
Had you yourself been involved with protests and rallies before the 24th of June 1978?
Vietnam, will that do? Yes. Although I'm a commissioned officer in the artillery, I thought that we had nothing to do properly in Vietnam, whatever, unlike the thing we did in Malay, where we were, I think, quite right to be there and did a particularly good, clean operation with the damage on both sides, physical damage, was absolutely minute, and worked very well indeed. The good folk in Malay were allowed to elect the governments they wanted, and they withdrew from the British Commonwealth. As a result, they became an independent company, Malaysia. Now, we had no right to be in Vietnam, whatever. We shouldn't have gone to join the Americans, and we certainly shouldn't have indulged in this magnificent system of calling up. That was not necessary. If we had a right to be there, soldiers would have volunteered, citizens would have volunteered. It wasn't so long after the Second World War that there were not quite a substantial number of quite healthy middle-aged men who would have been happy to go and serve again if it had been a just cause.
Had you been involved with any rallies or protests regarding lesbian and gay issues?
No, there were. I have to tell you that what happened in '78 was about the first one that I knew about, or even heard about.
Did you attend the march in the morning?
Yes.
And was that quite peaceful?
Oh yes. We had a license to do it, and we had nice banners, and we walked all the way down to Belmore Park, and people harangued us, which was nice, and I went home for lunch.
But were the police, do you remember there being any police?
I remember seeing 3 or 4 policemen, none in Belmore Park. So at that stage we weren't seen to be very dangerous.
So you went home for lunch, so you didn't attend any of the meetings?
No.
So going towards the evening, do you remember the atmosphere in Taylor Square?
Well, I remember, firstly, could we go back to the meeting?
Yes. When
Terry Goulden, who was one of the leading people in Camp New South Wales and the Phone a Friend part, and John Greenway, his partner, decided that they were going to need some bail money. And they went to a lot of trouble. In fact, I'm told that John actually mortgaged his house to get $1,000 in bail money. We had $200 or $300, I forget the amount, in the kitty in Camp New South Wales, and that's the bit I carried. Because we listened to what the conversation was, and we realised that when the march officially stopped at Liverpool Street, which is where our licence to march stopped, we were going to go on anyway. We were going to go up William Street to King's Cross. And we knew there was going to be trouble if we tried that, because we didn't have a licence, and the Commissioner of Police's office had made it very obvious that there was to be nothing that wasn't legal.
And this is the evening, correct?
This is the evening now. So, as you know, Taylor Square, we were very excited. There weren't very many of us, and some of us were wearing quite outlandish costumes, except Terry and myself. We were interesting spectators. We couldn't be seen to be in it, because we had the bail money.
Yes.
So we walked down on either side, all the way down to the square, where at that stage, as you may know, the police decided to confiscate the truck, because that wasn't part of the licence.
Who was the driver on the truck?
Lance Gowland.
And was there music being played from the truck? Or songs?
Yes.
Do you remember any of them at all?
No.
And when you went down Oxford Street, were people getting people out of the pubs?
Oh yes, out of the pubs into the streets. It was working like a charm. I saw an awful lot of gay men whom I recognised coming out of their pubs, out of their drinking grounds.
What sort of numbers do you think there were at the beginning of the parade?
200 perhaps.
And then how many more joined, do you think?
Upwards of 1,000. Yes, upwards of 1,000. And they were all going to go back to the pubs until they saw the police behaving the way they were.
But up until that point, when the police behaved as they did, when you were going down Oxford Street from Taylor Square,
No trouble at all.
were there many police at that point?
Didn't see very many at all. No, I wasn't conscious of them.
And as you said, there was a permit.
There was a permit, and they weren't parading on either side to keep us on the street or anything like that.
When did the trouble begin?
When they decided to confiscate the truck because it wasn't part of the licence, and they tried to drag Lance Garland out of the driver's seat. That's when everybody lost their cool.
Did Lance resist?
Oh yes. He was. I don't think I heard anybody say, "I arrest you because you've done this." They just said, "Come out of the truck." So
Did
Lance,
people come to his aid?
not at that stage, but people gathered very much in the middle of College Street, and somebody led us off, and that was Roniston.
You were about to say that Lance did something, I think.
Well, he resisted.
He resisted.
Very heavily indeed. He did not want to be dragged out of the truck that he'd rented. You know.
And then people went down William Street.
We were down College into William, where we turned to the right and we walked down William and up the street. There were still very few police officers inside. Very, very
Really?
few indeed.
And no arrests at that point? Nobody
none
dragging
whatever.
anybody away?
No. And Mr. Goulding and I were on either side, on the outside, watching the surprising look. Who are all these people? Looks on our face.
Did you feel nervous at that point?
Oh yes, very anxious indeed. They were having great fun, the people walking up in the middle of the street, but I wasn't, because I felt that we defied the police once, and in those days when you defied the police, they always came back.
They didn't let it go.
Oh,
So when people were going down William Street, and you say people seem to be in good spirits.
oh yes.
Do you think people went down William Street to challenge authority, or
No.
because they were in good spirits and they wanted to continue partying?
It wasn't a party. They wanted to make sure that discrimination was removed, and that was. We didn't try out of the pubs and into the street down William Street because it was bone large straight, except the working girls, and we didn't think it was fair to ask them to come out and join us apparently. But no. I think the idea was that we were going up to Alamein Fountain because behind there was the hotel, and that's where we were going to go drinking. I think that was the idea.
So you went to Darlinghurst Road,
Yeah,
and so from William Street, Darlinghurst Road, and you did a left towards the fountain.
yeah.
At what point did the police...
I became aware of the police all over Alamein Fountain and across both the streets as I came round the little bend where first time you see the fountain. That's where I saw at least 50 police officers.
Were you surrounded?
No, they just stopped us going any further.
But there weren't police behind you as well?
No, because at that stage there was no beside. There are shops, okay, including Les Girls. I bet he was worried about having his windows broken by somebody.
Sammy Lee?
Yes. No, that was... Sammy Lee ran the place down at Circular Quay, and also the very nice place in Goulburn Street. No, this was our leading person of interest. Oh dear, another seniors moment. It'll come to me.
We all have them.
Yeah, I have more. So anyway, we realised we weren't going to go any further. We couldn't get to the pub, and at that stage people got, I think, anxious and a bit worried, and we turned round to go back, where we discovered that the paddy wagons and more police were behind us as well.
So you've been surrounded, closed in.
Closed in.
And what were the police doing?
just advancing at us with their truncheons drawn.
How did you feel?
I was watching, remember, but I felt this was not going to be nice, and it wasn't, because the police just hoed into this gang. There was no warning cries of any sort at all. I don't know what the police officers claimed to have said, but we couldn't have dispersed anyway because they'd blocked all 3 exits. No, they just sailed in and started to arrest people.
Were they just arresting people, or were they bashing people as
They
well?
were bashing as well.
With batons?
Well, one man had his leg broken with the baton. He was a university student from Macquarie University.
Did you see any blood?
Lots on people, yes. Oh, yes. Scratches, bleeding noses.
And were they just left alive, or were they?
No, they were dragged
into
into the paddy wagon. All 53 of them were thrown into paddy wagon, and I mean thrown.
Did anybody try and liberate them?
No.
At that point?
No. The women often try to assist their own women friends with the police officers and try to detach the woman in question, but the police were paying no attention to them and just hit back.
Would you describe it as a riot?
No. It was a group of people not doing anything illegal being attacked by police officers. That's what it was. And they were trying to defend themselves.
And so people were being thrown into paddy wagons. There were 53 arrests. At what point did the police let everybody else who wasn't arrested go?
When the last paddy wagon drove off and they had nowhere else to put you, they just disappeared. It was very strange. But an awful lot of people had actually got through this barricade because the paddy wagons had also gone, and they were streaming back into civilization away from this dreadful site. But the Alamein police officers remained blocking that exit.
What police station were?
Darlinghurst.
So Darlinghurst Jail was that?
No, Darlinghurst Police Station.
Police station.
It is now a mental health. It's part of the community mental health team building. It has a padded cell in it. It had far too many people being arrested, and a small number. The reason that I had some money was we suspected that this would happen. If trouble came about, Terry and I realised that there were going to be an awful lot of arrests. We didn't know why. We didn't know that this assault was going to take place. We assumed that the gang was going to turn nasty on the police.
So when the police left, did you go home, or did you go straight to the police station?
Terry went straight to Darlinghurst. I discovered that Central Police Station at Central Criminal Court was the one where many of the women had been taken. They were placed in the drunk cell with drunks. And the charge sergeant was, I think, the nastiest man I have ever met in my life, including the previous Prime Minister. He delayed things. He was ponderous. He said, "How do you spell your name? Love."
Could you hear people in the cells at all?
No, there was only one out each time, and I'm standing beside them. So I had enough money for 2 women. So I let the word be known that the ones who had to be out first were the ones who would get cash. And 2 of them were, including Jenny Milburn, who is now a senior lecturer at UTS in the School of Law. And she went home and she got $600 or $800, some startling feat of cash, because there were no ATMs in those days. You couldn't go to a little office or little business and get cash out. And the second woman, whose name I don't know, her girlfriend had not been at the march but knew where she was, and she was waiting to take her home. And I said to the girlfriend, "This is what we need lots of cash." And the girl said, "We've got cash." And they came back. And so Jenny stayed there and did the rest of the bailing. So I was allowed out at that stage.
And I think one of those who'd been assaulted the worst was Peter Murphy.
Yes. He was a mess, but I didn't ever see him because he was at Darlinghurst Police. You need to talk to the people who were arrested with him.
So then what happened?
I then went home It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, as I recall, and it had been a long day.
And what was going through your mind? Were you angry? Were you shocked?
I was being selfish. I was very glad it was over for me. I didn't know what was going to happen in the courts the following morning. And I didn't know what the Herald was going to do when I got it on the Monday morning. But Sunday, everybody was out of jail. They'd all been bailed. I heard rumours through Terry that the young man who'd had his leg broken was in St Vincent's Hospital, but was okay. But nobody else had been put into hospital. But St Vincent's Accident Emergency looked at an awful lot of scars and stuff like that. Now, they may still have those records, incidentally, of the number of people who came to that hospital through Accident Emergency for minor assault damage.
You mentioned St Vincent's. I've heard that they managed to get a doctor, well, at least one doctor, in to see some of the prisoners.
Yes, so I'm told that would not have been from St Vincent's. That would have been one of the local GPs who were very gay-friendly indeed.
So the people have been arrested. At what point was everybody allowed out on bail?
As the money came up, out they went. As the money came in, out they went, one at a time.
What was the reaction of the mainstream press to that first Mardi Gras parade?
Well, nothing on Sunday, because it was far too late for the Sunday papers. It was after 10 o'clock in the evening. The Sydney Morning Herald had on the front page, riot in Sydney. You need to get a copy of that Sydney Morning Herald. You can get it. It's online on Trove, and Trove's back in the air again now. It's been off for a week. But there's a nice photograph which shows all the police officers not wearing their metal badges, which I found extremely interesting. They were ready for this.
They wanted to fight.
Oh yes, very definitely. And very careful planning. How did you know how many people to have at one place, and how many people did you know to have? How many paddy wagons did you know to have ready? No, this was very carefully planned indeed. This just didn't happen accidentally. And I had a conversation with one of the other 78ers yesterday at Parliament House. He said that's typical of the police. They'll always act like this. And I said, I think the police force by and large reacts the way they think their bosses want them to react.
So, is it true that the Sydney Morning Herald printed the names, ages, occupations, I think addresses as well?
Not the full address, just the suburb.
And people lost their jobs.
Oh yes, yes, very definitely. I was fortunate to meet one of the women who lost her teaching job at a girls' school on Monday morning when she went to work. She was fired on the spot.
In the reporting in general, though, had it been supportive of the parade?
No. It was called a riot, because that's what the police told them.
What about the gay press? Was it behind the parade, the march in the morning, or was it also a bit critical? Do you remember?
No. The Star Observer didn't exist then, did it? William and John did, but that wasn't a newspaper, that was a magazine. Campaign, did that exist in 78? I don't think it did. I really don't know.
So 53...
State Library can tell you.
53 people were charged.
Yes. One of them's case actually went to trial, and he was yesterday at the meeting. He left Australia.
Really?
Yes.
Because of what happened?
Yes. He lived overseas for 20 odd years before he could come back to Australia, and then he went to Queensland to live because his family had totally disowned him. He'd lost his job. But his case went before the magistrate. No evidence was given by the police. The magistrate said he would read the statements anyway. He read the statements and he said, I find that no case has been proved here, and I dismiss this charge immediately.
So all charges were dropped?
And they were dropped the following day, every single one.
Did any politicians or well-known people get behind? Nothing?
Not a one. We didn't have any friends in those days. When you think of somebody of the calibre of Michael Kirby, he couldn't come out at that stage. He was just trying to establish himself on the pecking order of the judiciary.
So when you see the police in the Mardi Gras now, how do you feel? And they're marching.
Well, I had the great good fortune of being able to work with the police, gay and lesbian community service group because I was on the standing committee of the Anti-Discrimination Board, which looked at discrimination in homosexuals. This group was for gay and lesbians and bisexuals. And I had worked with the police and the nursing staff at a number of hospitals and the prison officers at Long Bay the moment the HIV/AIDS epidemic broke out. They were understandably extremely worried about how was this disease transmitted, because nobody knew at that stage. I mean, for a long time, the suspicion was that if a man had had more than 3 injections of penicillin for gonorrhea, he would get HIV infection. That was the best that had come out of America. And then, simultaneously, the French and United States both produced the image of this retrovirus and how it was transmitted, body fluids. That was it. But quite a lot of body fluids. But it took a long time for that word to get through. It really did. It took far too long. And so we would talk to the prison officers and would warn them of the dangers of needles and sharp objects and not getting blood on them from any prisoner, no matter who he was, and not getting blood on themselves from anybody they didn't know, in fact, and being very careful when they had intercourse. And same thing with the police officers. That's why I went down to Goulburn, the training. I went there 5 times down to Goulburn just to give them a 1-hour chat about this with some nice pictures. I have a lovely transparency of the retrovirus that came from Scientific American. Beautiful thing. Really lovely to look at. Looks like a gem.
And all these years later, when they're actually in the parade,
I think you're in this parade because you volunteered. They're not detailed into it. They have to volunteer to do this. They're not all gay. Many of them are straight. More of them are probably straight than gay. We have a commissioner of police who said that somebody's sexual orientation was totally irrelevant to their being a policeman. It was their ability to think and to feel that was what was needed. And from that moment on, the police suddenly realised that they didn't have to be ridiculous and stupid any longer. Most of them got that message. But the traineeships used to go through a police sergeant. They'd be attached to a police station. And the police sergeants were stupid. That's why they were sergeants, because they weren't good for anything else. They was behind a counter. That's all they could do.
do you welcome them marching in the parade?
Oh, yes.
No mixed feelings?
No, whatever.
So
The one thing I do worry about a bit about the parade is that it's very commercial now, and we're losing the political message.
that was my next question.
Sorry.
What do you think it's lost?
The political message. Can we go on now?
If you could improve the current Mardi Gras parade in any way, what advice would you give?
It is so big now, and that's lovely. And there are so many people who want to be in it, and that's lovely too. I mean, if the Christians want to be in it, good luck to them. They may learn something. And I think for the size that it is and where it goes, it's not bad. It would be better if it could start around the Bathurst Street, George Street area and go through that little bit of the city first and then up the hill. That would be better, I think, because it would be longer. There would be more places for people to stand and watch it, because at the moment, as you would know, in Oxford Street, they're 10 and 15 deep. And that's no fun for 2.5 hours to stand looking at the back of somebody's head.
When you're with that 78er bus in the parade, I don't know if you're on the bus or if you're walking alongside
I'm in it, definitely sitting down.
The crowd goes wild. It's
Yes.
cheering you. How do you feel when you see
Embarrassed.
it? Embarrassed.
Embarrassed.
Do you feel thrilled? Do you feel jubilant? Or just
I'm
embarrassed?
just embarrassed. I'm tickle pink, but very embarrassed.
We've just had a government apology from the New South Wales government, a formal apology. How do you feel about that?
Now, you've had an apology from the Parliament of New South Wales, both the Legislative Assembly and not from the Legislative Council. You have not had an apology from the government. I'm sorry.
How do you feel about that?
Pissed off. I really am. I think they could do very much better than this, but quite obviously the right wing of the Liberals and the whole of the National Party and the right wing of the Labour Party are not in support of this. That's why they were not in Parliament. They were not in the House. I don't know how many councillors were in the Legislative Council, but probably no more than 4 or 5 on each side.
Do you think the parliamentary apology is good enough?
But it's all we're going to get. So let's work from there. We have an apology from the Parliament, which makes the laws, and the government should remember that.
Do you think it was a sincere apology?
Oh yes, from what I heard.
You were there, weren't you?
Yeah, indeed I was.
And I think it was the day before Fairfax apologised.
No, they didn't. They just said that that's what newspapers used to do in those days. It was not an apology.
Was it hollow?
Oh, no, it was what newspapers used to do in those days.
But the apology?
And they weren't sorry that that's how they used to be. They're happy that they aren't like that now.
Would you still like a proper, sincere apology from Fairfax?
I don't care. I'm a staunch supporter of the Sydney Morning Herald and have been since 1947. I have bought a copy every day of the week.
The police. The New South Wales Police Force have made it clear they're not going to apologise. Apparently the parliamentary apology was also on behalf of the police.
Because it was a government apology,
agency.
which it wasn't. That's nonsense. The trouble with the police apologising for assault and battery is that even the statute of limitations may permit actions against them. They would certainly allow civil actions. And that may be the barrier. That there are at least 53 people who have very good grounds to sue.
Do you think there will be a police apology?
I'd be very surprised if there was.
Would you welcome one?
If it would do any good, because I think that the police force has matured. I really do. I don't think that they are haunted by the fear of being discriminatory. I think they are multicultural. Well, certainly the officers are, there's no doubt of that now. And they are aware of disability. They are aware of minority groups. They arrest far too many Aboriginal men for being drunk, but the Aboriginal men are drunk, unfortunately. But whether arresting them helps, we know it doesn't, in fact. Now, maybe the police could get themselves together and open some drying out places to put Aboriginal men until they've sobered up. Maybe that would be better.
With the apologies, they're obviously just words. They've got sincerity,
Oh yes.
arguably attached, yes. But do they need to go further? Do there need to be more actions such as restitution, compensation?
That's something that the government will have to decide, and at this stage I can't see them doing that.
When you reflect back to that first Mardi Gras, what are your feelings almost 40 years on?
It was one of the weirdest nights I have ever spent in my life. The afternoon march was great fun. It really was exciting. I think of the first parade back up George Street Hill, which was 1980, I think, or 81, I forget. And Peter Bonsall-Boone was on the Angcare, which was the Anglican Church's pro-gay and lesbian movement. And outside the cathedral, but under the Electricity Commission's building, there was a group of terribly earnest Christians who were offering up prayers for us. And Bonsall took one look at these and thought, I can't stand this. So he said, "Basil dear, how are you?" And they stopped singing immediately.
Because he'd been a church secretary, hadn't he, at
Yes,
one point?
he'd been fired.
And because they had the Checkerboard ABC documentary
Yeah,
with Bon and Peter in it.
That's right.
Peter Duval.
yeah.
So what advice do you have for young activists, LGBT activists of today?
Keep focused, join community groups that are activist interested and have a policy to do something, to get some change done. Safe Schools, for instance, at the moment is a magnificent organisation and needs all the support and encouragement it can get. And I think that's one of the hopes very definitely. The Labour lawyers are still activists. There are about 200 of them now, and they are always looking for a cause. And you may have one in the back of your mind that you think that has something to do with gay, lesbian, bisexual, Q rights. Approach them. Join a group. Don't be a solitary activist.
Back then in the 70s, of course, the message from a lot of activists was liberation.
Yes.
A lot, particularly in Mardi Gras, the message that comes out is one of equality.
Yes.
We hear a lot about marriage equality being one of the issues, particularly the focus at the moment. Do you think liberation and equality are contradictions or can work hand in hand?
I can't see why they can't work together. I'd be much happier to see not tolerance, but acceptance. And that's why I always thought that the Catholic support group for gays and lesbians called acceptance was the perfect phrase. And there's somebody you might like to talk to, and that's the parish priest at Enmore, Father Peter Carroll, because he runs every Friday night a service for the acceptance members. And it's probably against the deliberate instructions of his bishop.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
If anything else I can tell you.
Anything you'd like to tell me?
Oh, I think that's it. If you're happy with that, I certainly. And thank you for talking to me and giving me this chance.
Well, thank you to you, your fellow activists, 78ers, all those before you and all those after you,
Yep.
who've worked to make everybody's life that much bit fairer, easier and better.
Thank you.
Thank you.